can sometimes tend to have a sort of a gatekeeper reputation. And it's really not about that. And the more prepared the students are when they first approach us, the better we are able to help them. We're all kind of interested in helping students find the school that's really going to be the best match for them. And if the student is willing to reach out, we're there to answer all of these kinds of questions that might come up. So I guess that's the first thing I would start with, is encourage your students to, of course, do their research, but communicate with the offices of admissions as well as the faculty at all of the schools that they're interested in. It's a lot of work, it takes a lot of time, there's research involved. They've got to figure out how to balance that with their schoolwork and their preparation for the audition and all of that, but they better figure out those time management skills sooner rather than later anyway, to embark on a career such as we've heard Brad talk about. So I'm also, I haven't had to dig out of any snow to get here today from just down the street, but I did have to dig out from over 2,000 applications. We just had our deadline on December 1st. So I think I'll start with what's kind of in my head right now as I try to sort through these applications and give you an impression of, first of all, what did it take to get there, to get a complete application in the door, and then what are we looking for? How's the process going to unfold to get to the audition that we've been hearing a lot about? And then what happens after the audition, and just kind of talk quickly through that process. My handout will cover some bullet points on either side of that process, but we've already heard a lot about audition preparation, so I won't dwell on that. For most music schools, students are going to have to really put together a complex, complete package that represents what they're all about. At the center of it, pretty much almost without exception now, is an online application, which, yes, was developed to simplify the process for the applicant, but still, in many cases, is a sometimes 20-page endeavor, asking the student all kinds of things, some of which they'll be able to answer right off the top of their head when they first log into the computer, and some of which they'll have to go ask mom and dad the answers to some of these questions, go do a little bit of research. I guess the bit of advice that's leading up to is to start that as early as you can. Most schools' applications will go live, as we now say, on September 1st. And with a December 1st deadline being almost universal, not entirely universal, but as far as music schools go, almost universal because of the audition process, students do want to get a jump start on that in the fall. So that really means having all of the background work done that we've been hearing about going into the fall of the senior year, hitting the ground running, in other words, and not trying to sort of carve the time out for this as you get to it during the course of that very busy fall term. So online application recommendations, sometimes these are handled electronically. We still, at Eastman, for example, we do have an electronic recommendation system. We still also get emails from professors. We get handwritten recommendations on letterhead at best, and with a whole 9 yards. I mean, basically, if we can assure ourselves that a recommendation comes from the source it says it's coming from, we will accept it. We're not going to force. There are, God bless them, faculty members on our faculty who just cannot figure out the online recommendation system. We're not going to force them to do that if they would be much more comfortable writing a letter. But the recommendations are an important part of this process. Depending on the school you're applying to, it will likely be some combination of musical recommendations and academic recommendations. And then there are the written statements and samples that the student might have to submit along with those. Personal statement, usually kind of talking about, why music, what are your professional goals, maybe why this particular school. Each school will have its own questions. And really anywhere from 1 to 3. There might be personal statements and essays, and if it's a university-based program, often there's a question you have to answer for the university, there's a question you have to answer for the music school, etc. And I'm going to try and speak as generally as possible, rather than talk specifically about Eastman's process, just to be as helpful as possible. So plan on having to write something. And the essays, I think, are one thing that students really do tend to put off to the last minute, and shouldn't. How you represent yourself in writing, we all know, is extremely important, and we are paying attention to that. Transcripts, of course, official transcripts have to be sent. We are starting to see more electronic transcripts. Again, the bottom line for most schools is that if it is, can be ascertained that this is an official transcript coming from the source that it should be coming from, we will accept it. So that doesn't mean an emailed PDF of the transcript. That means the school contacting us through an online portal where we have to log in, enter our password, download the transcript. Usually it's up there only for a limited amount of time. This document will self-destruct, sort of thing. And we will accept it that way. Most transcripts are still coming into us on paper, and that's fine. And then in a lot of areas, let me just pause for a moment, make sure I've captured all of kind of the core, the application, the recommendations, the written work. And then, depending on the major, there will be sort of additional things that the student will have to provide. More and more schools are requiring pre-screening in more and more areas. So for voice, for example, I think it's been quite common for some time that in order to weed through the 10,000 sopranos that are applying to any given school, give or take, we might want to hear something first in order to determine that we're going to have a manageable pool. First of all, we can't schedule 10,000 auditions. That's a made-up number, of course. But also to save the applicant the trouble. I mean, if you're truly not a qualified applicant, why should you fly across the country for a live audition when this really just is not going to be a viable option for you? So we're seeing this now extend out at a lot of schools to piano, to violin and cello. A lot of jazz areas are doing pre-screening before live audition. So while I couldn't agree more with all of the great advice we heard about preparing for the live audition, I think it's worth pausing on this pre-screening idea just long enough to say that if pre-screening is required for your major, you need to treat it as if it's the live audition. You need to make a recording that you would hand to somebody if you were unable to appear live, and have it be the best representation of you possible. So that means good sound quality, you're well prepared, it's not the piece that you're preparing to play for your audition, haven't quite mastered yet, but you're just kind of, it's just to get me in the door, so it only has to be good enough. I think it's a really unfortunate, maybe even tragic, when a pre-screening recording comes in and it's just not a good representation of the student, but it's really all we have to go on, and then an admission decision is made. If the decision is a negative one, that's a final decision, and the process ends there. So it's difficult to overemphasize the importance of the pre-screening. And again, that's due December 1st. So that repertoire has to be prepared ahead of time, should have been learned over the summer, et cetera, et cetera. And again, depending on the major, there may be other materials to send in. Composition, of course, will require a portfolio of your work. Music education often requires an additional written statement about your specific interest in education. And theory, for example, for schools that have a theory major may require a paper, et cetera, et cetera. It all boils down to just really knowing what the requirements are for each specific school, not being afraid to contact the admissions office and ask. That's what we're there to help with. So once we get all of these materials, the question becomes, okay, how do I get to the audition? Obviously, if there's pre-screening involved, that's the first hurdle. The schools get the recordings, they send them out to the faculty. They usually just get a yes, no back from the faculty. A lot of us in the admissions business get questions about, well, can you give me some critique, or can you tell me what was wrong? Usually we can't, because we've got a Y or an N that we're looking at that point. Some schools will have, as Brad mentioned, will have an academic component that needs to be passed in order to get to the audition. Others, Eastman, for example, does have an autonomous admissions process from the University of Rochester, so you don't have to be admitted to U of R, you don't have to be accepted academically, as it were, we will schedule your audition, assuming you've passed pre-screening, and look at your academics at a later stage in the process. Every school is going to be different. They will all require your transcript. Even the real standalone conservatories are going to look at the academic work. So a favorite question that I get asked a lot is, well, how much does it matter, or which matters more, or can one offset the other? And the only in our business we become famous for non-answers, but the best non-answer I can come up with is it all matters. Yes, it's possible, for a student who's really no good at math to get into music school. The secret's out. If you look through the core curriculum and the humanities requirements in most bachelor music programs, but certainly not all, math will not necessarily be a requirement. I'm remembering now struggling through my science requirement in Ithaca College. The physics of sound sounded like an easy course for a music major. Yikes. But in any case,